what's live cattle today.
Welcome to the Running on Grass podcast. As always, I'm your host here live with Eamon O'Toole. How we doing, Eamon?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you today, Logan, over here in Imperial, Nebraska.
Well, thanks for flying in to come see your cattle.
Yeah, I'm excited to come see them. We looked at a few last night and saw that those pairs are looking great. Logan's got them out calving, and we are well into calving season on Ladder Ranch, even though it's happening on Wineglass Ranch mostly.
Tell them how we typically calve them out.
So different in where I live, a lot of people calve in the hay meadows, and then they're turning stuff out as they're pairing them out or as a group after they brand, something like that. And over here, Logan's got them turned out on, open range in the sand, or I guess not the sandhills, but the country north and around Imperial, Nebraska. So those cattle are just out doing it on their own, and nobody's out there checking them, and they seem to be doing great, and everybody was healthy and happy when we looked at them yesterday evening.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll defer about 320 acres year before, kick out just under 200 pair in a group is what we like to do, and just let a cow be a cow, and we get along really well with that range calving program.
Yeah, I've actually implemented some of that at my place in Wyoming as well. I have large BLM permits, and we turn them out just like that, and it seems to work a lot better than historically we calved in meadows, like I was saying, and the cows quit chasing after their calves because they're used to people running around on four-wheelers or horseback all the time checking things. And so it's really, I think, better for the cow. And we were visiting with a guy last night that did it up north in the sandhills, and he said, boy, our calving rate went from probably in the high 80s, low 90s to over 95% just in 1 year of just letting a cow go be a cow.
Yep, and that was Robert Brocious with Maddox Cattle Company. They were calving out 1,200 pairs, I believe, on the range, and they gave them a lot of extra space, and they had their best weaning rate ever. It was like 90,
little over 96%. Yeah. And the other interesting thing he said is they split them into two groups, and so there were a couple things that we learned in visiting with Robert yesterday evening is two groups of 600, and then they had some cows that had been on that ranch before. He said the first year, which is what I experienced also, is we lost that 2, 3, 4% of cows that were the trouble cows that had bad udders or whatever those things were. And so in what Maddox did is they were able to split those cows. Those cows had been there. They knew where the waters were, and they knew how to utilize the country. And then also not having them right on the Niobrara River where they were at, because of coyotes and those kind of things are so much more likely to be around the river where the wildlife likes to hang out.
Yeah, it's definitely a welcome change. What do you want to get into today?
Yeah, I think, I've got my notes here, and there's so much good stuff. And I think cover crops is really where we should start. You do so much of it here where we've talked about this before. I just don't have a cover crop situation at 7,000 feet, but tell us what kind of cover crops you're putting in and timing of putting them in versus rainfall and all of those things.
Well, let me tell you about a cover crop experiment that didn't work. No one likes to hear about your success, but they are very interested in your failures. So we tried to do milo as a grazing crop. We just grazed it off. We put about 700 steers on it. We only had, I got my notes actually. So it wasn't particularly good mile. It's probably 50 bushel an acre, maybe 40. It was grass weeds mainly was one of the problems. We all struggled with weeds last year, but we only got 51 steer days an acre out of that, which I say it's worth about $1.75 right now. We did have to cake them a little bit, which is really sub $100 an acre revenue. But we think we did 2.2 average daily gain. So we're producing about 112 steer pounds per acre. And let me get into my costs here. Rent is about 60. My herbicides, which were more expensive for the Milo, were over 30. I had $15 of fertilizer in it and $11 of seed. So my cash cost per acre were like 120. So here's what I learned. And I feel silly for having to have learned it again, but a diverse mix, there's a lot of value in having a diverse mix versus a monoculture. We're going to go back to growing our 10-way warm season mix. We feel like we get a lot better performance out of it, which makes sense, right? Because you have 10 different things out there. Something's going to grow well given the conditions of when the rain comes, when the heat comes, and all of those things. So at Wineglass Ranch in our dryland system, we are better equipped to grow forage. We can always grow forage, whereas we can't always produce the grain. So we are moving back to forage cover crops on that.
Yeah, and as we talked about before, with the decreased grain prices, I think that's the direction most people are starting to think, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more interest, even the guys just like with silage crop or what have you, there's just more interest in cover crops than there ever has been. And the reason for that, so I ran my numbers on this. So to grow my C4 mix with paying $60 in rent, I'm 110 cash cost an acre, which right now on the farm side, just being defensive is critical, and not just throwing $1,000 in cash costs out there. Just trying to be cheap and trying to survive, I think, is the name of the game this year.
Wow. In these great cattle prices, it's hard to believe, people are talking about being on the defensive instead of the offensive, where you can go, let's go find more grass, let's expand, let's do those things, where you do need to be on the defensive and watch those costs.
Yeah.
Especially in these great times.
Yeah. In the worst of times, you need to be planning on the best of times. The really smart grain farmers right now are positioning themselves. This is not me, to be clear. But the really smart grain farmers are positioning themselves right now for truly great times. Like right now, the top of the cattle industry is not the time to figure out how to expand and grow and take advantage of the best of times, where we're currently in those times. It's the guys that tried to do that 4 or 5 years ago that are reaping what they sowed right now.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that a little bit on our last podcast. Why 5 years ago would you have wanted to be in the cattle business? And today is the reason that you wanted to do that. And whoever knows that they're investing in something like that 5 years out when times don't look so good. But those are the times to invest, is when things don't look so good.
You're exactly right. So grain farmers, get ready for great times. They're coming. You heard it from here. You heard it on the Running on Grass podcast first.
Yeah, a guy that doesn't have any grain right here.
And the hobby farmer.
It's easy to talk about it when I don't have it. Yeah, Logan, let's visit a little bit about where feeder prices are, live cattle prices are, and where you think that's going.
So new all-time highs. I feel like every time we record a podcast, we say there are fresh all-time highs.
That's because it's true.
That is because it's true. On Tuesday, they traded at $255, which is a amazing price. Congratulations to the cattle feeders on $255, and that was traded on a Tuesday. It'll be interesting to see, what they get bought today and tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday, and Friday's normally when that cash trade happens. So, what's your take?
I was reading earlier this morning. There's some guys that are really trying to position themselves because this thing just keeps getting higher, and it doesn't look like, I think 2028, they're saying we already know what the calf crop looks like. We're already set. The bell has been struck. So where does this thing go? Maybe 2029, because the calf crop that's being born, we're a year out from that heifer retention, and another year out from that heifer possibly being bred or going into a feeder program. So we've already seen what the cards look like up to 2028, and everything that I can find says that we should stay in these same great prices into 2028.
That's what Don Close and Daryl Peel are saying, is that the supply is known. The demand is risk. The supply is known, but they're expecting diminish supply late into this decade is the terms that they use. So there are two experts that would agree with you there, Aaron.
Well, I'm glad I'm in the right side of history on this one.
We'll see.
We'll see.
The reality is typically much wilder.
2028 is still a long ways out.
Yeah, it's hard to believe as a cow man that it could be that good for that long. We're just skeptical. We've been burned in the past, and it's just very difficult to imagine a what would that be? A 6-year bull run?
Yeah. Yeah, and like we've said, it's been climbing every year for 5 years. We're reaping the rewards of this, but it's hard to believe because we all lived through 14, 15 where we got stung on 16, and everybody said, "Oh, this thing's going to be good for years and years to come." And I think everybody's still sitting back waiting for the shoe to drop, and that hasn't happened. And it, like we said in 14, 15, how can it? But at the time we had more producers, we had more land that hadn't been developed. When we talk about 2,000 acres a day going into development, and we had more young producers possibly, or lower interest rates at least, that were people were willing to go borrow that money to go buy that expensive cow or go rent that pasture, buy that pasture, those different things. So when you start compiling all this information, you're like, how can we grow and create the next generation of cattle producers? And it just doesn't seem like there's enough land out there and the people to do it with the right, with the banks and money lining up the way that it did last time. Plus, the other big thing is we were all saying, well, Texas is out, and that's why this is happening, because Texas was in drought, and that's how many cattle they put into the system. And now we've lost all those acres, and it doesn't matter if Texas goes out, then we'll just see these prices go even higher. But and we're in a drought like we were in Texas at that time too. So, except it's west wide, it's not just Texas.
So what you're telling me is this time is different.
This time is different. Yeah, there's too many negative factors to bring down a great cattle market.
Well, I'm already starting to think about the next run up in calf prices, cattle prices in general, which will occur sometime probably in the mid 2030s. My question is, the 2014, 2015 was so brief. It came and then it just fell. In 2016, it fell like a rock. Feeder cattle hit $1.10.
Jeez.
$1.10.
And you said we're at 255?
Well, no, that was feeder cattle.
Oh.
Live cattle were under $1.
Oh, wow.
Feeder cattle were at 370.
Wow. That's hard to think about.
Yeah, too bad you can't just take bin storage with calves. Just
hold them up.
Yeah, just put in 1 billion bushel capacity and just sock that thing full of calves and just wait it out.
Yeah.
Jeez. But so my thought was the 2014-15 was so quick. And this one was so long because everyone was like, "No, I got burned last time. I'm not expanding and losing my ass again." I wonder if this next time it's going to be quick because people will be like, "Hey, we got this will be the next 6-year bull run. We got plenty of time."
Yeah. Wow. I'm just still reeling from the idea of where it was in 16 versus today, and that is shocking. Shocking. Well, let's talk a little bit about the fires that happened up north and what those guys are doing now that you know about because you live over in this part of the world. But also, as we were talking about at breakfast this morning, what kind of seed is coming in, good, bad, otherwise, from all the hay that's being trucked in?
Sure. So there's a lot of hay being trucked in. A lot of the ranchers are choosing to put wheels under feed and kind of feed their way through this situation. And that didn't make sense to me at first, but then after I thought about it some more. The typical ranch with 200 cows, they wouldn't be able to survive without those cows there. You know what I mean? It's their entire lives. So, and they're getting the feed subsidized. I've donated to the fund. We donated 2 heifers. So it's subsidized. So that's kind of helping. And there was a lot of hay put up in Nebraska. In February, you couldn't sell hay in Southwest Nebraska. And that is changing a lot because of the dry conditions and mainly, the fires.
Wow. How much hay do you think has been sent to that part of the world from regionally into the Ogallala, at least the fire area?
Man, I couldn't quantify it. A ton. I mean, they're trying to replace their whole summer grass, as I understand it.
Right. After the 28 inches of rain they had last summer, which was, miles and miles and miles to 650, 60,000 acres.
Yeah.
And if you could take all that, and that's how, when I ride the range at my place and I think, how long can this last? I think if we baled this up, if we ran a baler through everything that's edible or that cows want to eat here, how many bales does this look like?
Yeah.
And when you talk about that country up there where those fires were, that's a lot of bales.
Yeah. And it's a lot of feed. I mean, we were talking at breakfast about the hay situation in your neck of the woods versus ours. Nebraska is blessed. We put up more feed than we need, frankly, most of the time. And you're in a more unique situation. Yeah.
And I'll kind of go back and talk about that for a second. And I hadn't really quantified it until I talked about it out loud at breakfast. And so I live in this small valley. I think we have about 19,000 irrigated acres in my community. And in comparison, over the hill and around Saratoga, Encampment, and the Platte Valley, they have 100,000 acres, just 5 times more hay put up in that community than in mine. And so hay is a finite resource where I live, and it's still an hour or 2 hour drive, depending on if the mountain pass is open or closed, to Encampment, Saratoga, which has more hay, but they also run a lot of cattle over there. And so when you start leaving my valley to go get hay, you have to go to like Riverton or Vernal, Utah. Craig, Colorado sometimes has some available, but we are 3 hour drive to where there's really a lot of hay put up. You get over to Rawlins, Wyoming, not a lot of hay put up there. You go to Rock Springs, Wyoming, not a lot of hay put up between Rawlins and Rock Springs on the I-80 corridor there. You get up to Muddy Gap, which is kind of halfway or so between Rawlins and Casper, and there's nothing really there. So you've got to travel quite a ways to get into some hay, which makes hay in my community very expensive. And I think I was reading a thing the other day that said, showing the hay values in different parts of Wyoming, and then more regionally as well. And the Rocky Mountain West was the highest at like $195 a ton average. Wow. Because of those kind of scenarios.
Yeah.
And the drought.
Highly regionalized, and you can't put wheels under hay like you can other commodities.
Right. And which is why I bring cows out here to Nebraska, is it's a lot cheaper for me to bring cows to the feed than it is to bring that quantity of feed to my cows.
Yeah. How'd you get to be so smart?
Man, I listen to old people. Yep. My grandpa, I remember him saying that, and they'd send cattle out every once in a while when they didn't get enough hay put up, or they got grew our home herd or something like that, that he said it's always cheaper to gather up the cows and pay that trucking bill once there and once back than it is to bring in load after load after load of hay and an operation our size, sometimes that gets into multiple loads a day. And then you think of how much they're consuming on a corn stalk, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of feed in that corn.
Yeah, there is.
So, yeah.
Where do you want to hit next?
I think that it would be really good to talk a little bit about what you're thinking going into the summer, and what you're going to do with the livestock you still have on hand after the big cow sale.
Sure.
And I'll after that maybe visit a little bit about where I'm going to take my stuff and what my plan is to exit Nebraska.
Sure. So yeah, we're calving out Amon's cows for them on some deferred range. We still have some cows, calving them out. TJ's calving out the first calf heifers. I had a rough go at the beginning, but ended well. Someone told me one time, calving, if it starts hard, it'll end easy. If it starts easy, it'll end hard. And I found that to be true in my own experience. But Also have a bunch of stockers. We're probably 70%, 65, 70% stockers on an AUM basis. We're going to expose a lot of those heifers, sending some to Eamon as well for breeding. Going to expose them to those Jurgensen bulls for early February or late February calving. And just caught almost an inch of rain here in the last week, so feeling a little bit more optimistic. I was wearing my wool socks yesterday, so cool weather goes a long ways in Nebraska where we can get heat and burnt out early. So feeling pretty optimistic at the moment. What are you looking at this summer?
So we are going to bring cattle from Nebraska at the middle to end of June and haul them back to our national forest country and go right on to the national forest or right next to hold up for a week or so and then be able to go on and we'll brand those calves out here in Nebraska and then haul them home as branded calves. So it's hopefully going to be very seamless, easy to move out and go right to that national forest where the cost difference, as we discussed yesterday when we were driving around, is quite different, where we're looking at, that dollar, I think it's up to maybe $1.39, $1.49 a head a month on the public lands versus over here in Nebraska, it's over $2 a day an animal. And
well, per pair in Nebraska, I've heard $3 in the threes all the way up to $4 per pair per day.
Yeah. They were
so
kind of
$4 a day versus $1.40 a month.
Yeah,
You can afford to ship them.
you can afford to ship them back to that. Yeah, they were razzing me a little bit last night. Him and Logan and Robert Brocious about that these new costs of Nebraska grass kick in, and I said, well, that's kind of the tough thing about selling your calves early is you gotta stick with the price that you took early.
Yeah, that's the truth.
They were starting to talk about $3.25, and when those prices kick in, and I said, boy, I hope I'm trucked out of here by then.
Yeah, that's why we sign contracts in the winter.
Jeez. Yeah, this thing is just getting out of sight, and that's what great prices do. And some of these guys that are looking, if we want to backtrack a little bit and talk about if you're putting in cover crops, you're looking at a $3.25 to $4 opportunity when the cost of that corn maybe isn't worth putting in and putting up.
Yeah, especially if you can find the pairs. We should also hit on, you and I at breakfast were having a conversation. We keep reading these advertisements that say, are you prepared to have the 200-pound discussion of, what it would be like to sell 200 extra pounds on a calf? And what is 1 pound on a calf worth today, Eamon?
The math we ran, it costs $1.10 to put on 1 pound.
Yeah.
Is what in the feedlot scenario.
Are you sure it's not $6?
Wait, are you telling me that it's? I think the discussion we used was 5, but still, it's like that. What about the cost of fencing? What about the cost of your labor? What about the cost of feed and all the other things you have? So when you backtrack and you say, well, and somebody's trying to sell you something, and you say, well, it's not actually $5. This is what that pound of gain is, and I have that in a live scenario in a feedlot with the heifers I'm going to breed this summer. They're still in the feedlot while my grass is getting grown up in the mountains yet, and which is a good segue to visit a little bit about the increased urgency to get on that grass this summer. I'm thinking I'm going to bring my calves and put them back 10 days earlier than normal, and my grass is a month ahead of schedule. Our river, which, as we've talked about in previous episodes about irrigating and how that all works, basically means our snowpack is so much lower, and our river is 2 months ahead of where it normally is this time of year, and our grass is a month ahead of where it normally is this time of year. So totally different, and I'm worried if I don't get cattle out on that grass early. I'm happy to take them off early if that's what needs to be done. But if I don't get them out there early, then I'm going to miss the peak of that grass, because if it's early, then I expect that its whole cycle is early.
Yeah, and your grass is probably like ours, where it increases in feed value to a point and then decreases. So most of your, like when we turn out steers onto the range or heifers, most of our gain is the first half, 80% of the gain is probably the first half while they're out there, which is one of the reasons we grow those cover crops is get them off the range and get them flushed up on those C4 mixes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how long this summer lets us go. We've had 1.5 inches of rain in my community in Little Snake River Valley in south central Wyoming in April. And I think we've seen more moisture in April than we saw almost all winter.
Yeah.
And then, as I was telling Logan, I think we were 13 inches behind coming out of 2025. 13 inches of moisture didn't happen. So that's total loss. And now we're 1.5 inches means an awful lot right now. Our community is green. It looks great. Grass is early, but the river is going down every day. These rains kind of keep it bumped at least to a level, because when the high mountains are they're getting some snow. We had 3 inches of snow at 9,000 feet the other day. And as that melts off, it just keeps that river bumping along for a little bit longer. So every day we can get out of that river is another day one.
Yeah, and I heard that the snowpack held better in April than they anticipated.
Yeah, which is due to the rains and snow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as dire as it was a month ago even.
I will say that it's held us from the inevitable.
Sure.
It's interesting listening to the Colorado River calls. That is the word that is continuously used by every upper basin state engineer that's talking about what's going to happen with the river, where we are with Lake Powell, Lake Mead. Dire is the word of every conversation.
Wow.
So it's kind of, these are holding off the inevitable unless we can get into some monster moisture scenarios.
So let's if this super El Nino doesn't hit and we are looking at drought across the western United States, how will that affect things? How would that affect the markets?
I think it just keeps things up. It's Torrington's having a bunch of calves go through their 7-8 weights, all the stuff that we're about to all turn out. It's because they didn't get any moisture in eastern Wyoming.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cattle that go out into eastern Wyoming. And I think that's all of Wyoming, at least in western Nebraska. Torrington is one of the larger barns in the United States. And I think that is exactly what's going to keep this thing driving up, is that these cattle don't have a place to go now. And, fortunately for me, fortunately for you, I'm in a scenario that I can hold on, I think, one more year with the numbers I'm running. And if it doesn't get better, then we'll have to start running around and figuring out if we want to shrink or lease ranches or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, what do you do?
Point. But it's very interesting to see the quantity of yearlings running through the barns right now because people are out of grass.
Yeah. Yep. I think there's definitely more volume like I looked at Torrington, and there's more volume there than there normally is.
Yeah. Tell everybody what numbers you found because I called you and I said, Logan, I think if we sold our calves today that we bought over the winter, we would lose money on them today because we have winter feed costs into them.
Yeah. So I was looking at the price. We're at all-time highs, right? So surely they've gone up in value, but I ran the numbers and the heifers that we were buying in the fall, the sticker price today, it's like, oh, well, it should be good, but it's when you factor in interest, feed costs, death loss, and all of that, it's nearly break even, if not at about a $50 loss is what I figured, depending on what costs you have in there. Overheads are the wild card.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the trucking bill to move them wherever they're at to where they need to go. So
yeah, you trucked yours quite a ways.
Yeah. Once again, I live a bit in the middle of nowhere. It's absolutely gorgeous. But
yeah, too bad there's not a feedlot next door like me.
The feedlot I'm in, which is one of the closest feedlots with real capacity, is about 5.5 hours from my home place for the summer. And so it's a journey. And so when I factored in my costs and you put in the trucking to get them home, I think I'm closer to $100 a head on loss today. So those gains in the value of those cattle are going to happen when they get on grass. And then obviously once we get a bull onto them and they can get bred, we're living with loss all the way up to the point until we can start turning the corner, getting on grass for cheaper gains and getting cattle bred that's where the win starts to happen for us on our heifer breeding program.
What a plug for running on grass.
Man, it just comes back to that, doesn't it? Once you get out of using the machine to throw feed to them, the money starts turning.
You're exactly right.
Yep. Yeah.
You want to hit on? We're going to try to do a closer on this podcast on what we're reading. Do you want to start to hit on that? What have you been reading, Eamon?
Yeah. Besides all the articles and things that we talk about here all the time, I do enjoy a little reading just to enjoy reading. And I've been reading a book, and it's taken me way too long, but it's called Undaunted Courage, and it's an easy read. It's a very detailed story about Lewis and Clark heading west and Thomas Jefferson putting together the entire idea, getting it through Congress to get the money for it. That's the first 150 pages, which is a little dry if you're not into that stuff. But boy, once they take off and they start on the journey, it is a roller coaster.
What are your top takeaways?
I was very shocked. Two different things that were so far in the book that are just blowing my mind. One, we talked about how buffalo were the very best grazers, and that was the way that everything should have been. What they talk about in this book, so this is as real as it gets, the two guys that were on the ground with their crew, and they had to take days off of their travel and trying to get to the Pacific Ocean because of the quantity of prickly pear around Great Falls, Montana. And they got up on a bluff and they could see, I think they said like 40,000 buffalo or something. It was some unreal number, and they just went for on and on and on for miles. But the water source was the river at Great Falls. And there was a blanket of prickly pear along that river, which shows, yes, they did great grazing things and other things happened there ecologically, but what they did on overgrazing around the rivers and overusing the bluffs on the rivers, things like that, was really detrimental to the system. So we can't take all of the good things that happened without understanding the bad on the grazing piece, and we have to input that into our own operations, whether it's water tanks or I drink out of rivers and springs mostly on my operation. And then the other big thing was they talked about all the salmon that died in the salmon run. And this is before there were any dams on the Columbia River or anything like that happened. And that's just part of their system, is it's a certain percentage of those salmon die in the salmon run in a natural system. And that's what everyone's using to say, hey, we have to take out all these dams in the Columbia, when that's just part of the natural system because of the death loss.
Yeah, it reminds me of the wolf video where about 8 years ago, they had this video about how they were going to introduce 5 wolves into an ecosystem and it was going to fix it. It's a lot more complicated. And as ecosystem managers, we know that and can laugh at it. But for the general public, they're like, man, if we just release six wolves into Colorado, we're going to fix all of our problems.
That'll fix it, right? What could an apex predator do?
Yeah.
So,
it's complicated.
Yeah. So what are you reading?
I've got 2 I want to hit. I just finished Big Sur by Jack Kerouac. Logan Pribno is a lot of things, including a rancher. I was a big beet fan growing up. And I never read Big Sur, and I had a friend recommend it. And it is Jack Kerouac post-fame, in the depths of alcoholism, trying to sober up in a cabin in Big Sur. A riveting read. I got to read it as a 42-year-old man, and you see that he's not better for the fame and the money. He did not improve. He was a better man on the road, and it was an interesting read in middle age. I'll tell you that.
Wow. What's the other book?
It is Pat Goggins. As I See It, Pat Goggins. I just started it. I picked it. It's a monster. It's a 500-page, like, the thing weighs 20 pounds. It is just a monster, but I started it and I picked it back up. And I was reading about his coming of age in the Great Depression. And it was eye-opening again every time you read about it. He didn't have a pair of new shoes until he was 12. I mean, those people were just broke. You know, you could take someone from that era and walk them around our world today, our supermarkets, our downtowns, our main streets, and they would be in awe. They would think that we are surrounded by abundance. So it is definitely a good perspective. And I purchased the book. Pat Goggins, he's the one that started Northern Video, also the Vermilion cattle. He, a titan of the industry. And the reason I picked it up is a friend told me that he said in the book that the leverage was ultimately going to go down to the cow-calf man. And I thought, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Doesn't always feel that way.
It does not always feel that way. And this guy's predicting this 20 years ago, or that's pretty wild. So that's the main reason I picked it up.
Yeah. Great. Well, those are ones I'll have to put on my list. Logan and I talk about books a lot, and every time he brings up another one, my list just gets longer, and someday I'll get through them. Hopefully by the time I die, I'll have read all the books we talk about.
Yeah, I also have a pretty big backlog at the moment.
Yeah, I sent Logan a book, and it is a monster of a book to read, but I sent him one 2 years ago or something, and I even
up there.
bought him the book for Christmas and sent it to him, and he still hasn't got to it.
I'll get to it.
The list is long and it is deep. Yeah. But I think next time let's visit a little bit more about, I think we've got to keep talking about what the effects of this wildfire are for kind of our local region here between Wyoming and Colorado, or Wyoming and Nebraska. And I think that's just going to be a constant for the next 2 years of seeing what this looks like, how that grass comes back, how the ground recovers. And I'm very interested, just from an outsider's perspective, to see what the land does there. Yeah. So, let's keep on talking about those guys. Let's keep trying to help those guys. They're going to be struggling for I think the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think they are.
Yeah, and I think as we move on in our grazing plans, and I'll start bringing my cattle back here in a couple months, and we'll kind of talk about how branding goes. We'll be out here next month doing some branding out at the Wine Glass and on Maddox cattle, where the rest of my animals are. And is there anything else you want to hit on next time?
Yeah, I'll be grazing some oat pea cover crop with our collared heifers that we'll be sending you, and I'll kind of dive into how that goes and what kind of a tool that it is.
Okay. Great. Well, let's keep on ranching.
Yep. Keep running on grass.
Thanks, Logan.
See ya.